Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. In the land of Viridia, a shadow had fallen so deep and so wide that it seemed as if the very light of the sun had been snuffed out. For centuries, the land had been ruled by Malakar, a sorcerer whose dark magic was as boundless as it was cruel. His tyranny was absolute, his power unmatched. Yet it was not his might alone that kept the people in check. Malakar wielded a far more insidious weapon. He erased the very names of those who dared to resist him. It was not enough to kill them, their identities were stripped away, their deeds forgotten, their legacies erased. They became nothing more than whispers on the wind, nameless phantoms lost to history. In the heart of this darkness, there lived a young warrior named Tyr. He was tall and strong, with a gaze that spoke of both fire and sorrow. Tyr had grown up in a small village at the edge of the cursed lands, a place where even the bravest feared to tread. His parents had been rebels once, proud fighters who had dared to rise against Malakar. But they, too, had been consumed by the sorcerer's curse. Their names were no longer spoken, their faces no longer remembered. Tyr had lived with this loss his entire life, the weight of it pressing down on him like an iron chain. Yet, unlike many who had accepted their fate, Tyr burned with a desire for change. He often wandered the outskirts of his village, where the ruins of a once great city lay in desolation. It was there, among the crumbling stones and forgotten monuments, that he first heard the whispers of an old prophecy. It spoke of a nameless hero, a warrior who would rise from the shadows to lead the final revolt against Malakar. The prophecy was vague, a mere fragment of an ancient tale, but it was enough to ignite a spark within Tyr. Though he was skeptical of such stories, he could not shake the feeling that his destiny was tied to this prophecy. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the land in a blood-red glow, Tyr made his decision. He would not wait for a hero to save his people. He would become that hero, even if it meant sacrificing everything. He knew what he had to do, and he knew that he could not do it alone. He would gather an army, not of renowned warriors, for they had all been defeated, but of those who had nothing left to lose, the forgotten and the forsaken. Together, they would rise against Malakar. Tyr began his journey with a single step, leaving behind the village that had been his home for so many years. He traveled through the dark forests and barren plains, seeking out those who had been cast aside by Malakar's rule. His first stop was a remote mountain pass, where he had heard rumors of a skilled archer living in isolation. It was there that he found Lyra. Lyra was a woman of few words, her face hard and unforgiving. She had once been part of a noble family, but Malakar had destroyed them, erasing their name from the annals of history. She had taken to the mountains, living as a recluse, her only companions the wind and her bow. Tyr approached her cautiously, knowing that trust was a rare commodity in these times. He told her of his plan, of the army he wished to raise. To his surprise, Lyra agreed to join him without hesitation. She had longed for a chance to strike back at the sorcerer who had taken everything from her. With Lyra by his side, Tyr continued his quest. They journeyed to the far corners of Viridia, gathering a small but dedicated group of rebels. There was Goran, a former knight who had lost his title and his name after refusing to serve Malakar. His once proud armor was now battered and worn, but his spirit remained unbroken. Sira, a healer who had studied the ancient, forbidden magic, joined them as well. She was soft-spoken and gentle, yet beneath her calm exterior lay a fierce determination. And then there was Brak, a giant of a man with unmatched strength, who was mute and thus already nameless. The group swore an oath to fight not for glory or recognition, but for the freedom of their people. They accepted that their names would never be remembered, but they were driven by a higher purpose, ending Malakar's reign. They became known as the Nameless Army, a force that existed only in the shadows, unseen and unheard, but deadly nonetheless. Their journey took them through the most treacherous parts of Viridia. The first real test of their resolve came when they entered the haunted forest, a place where the spirits of past rebels wandered, forgotten and lost. The air was thick with a sense of despair, and the trees seemed to close in around them as they moved deeper into the forest. The spirits were drawn to the living, their ethereal forms whispering of doom and hopelessness. Tear led the way, his sword at the ready, but it was Sira's forbidden magic that proved to be their salvation. She chanted ancient words, her voice rising above the whispers of the dead, and the spirits recoiled as if struck. They continued through the forest, but the journey took its toll on them. The weight of their task seemed heavier with each step, and doubt began to creep into their minds. When they finally emerged from the forest, they found themselves in the City of Whispers, a hidden refuge where the remnants of past civilizations lived in secret. These people had long ago accepted their fate, but they had not forgotten the nameless heroes who had fought and died for them. They kept the memory of the nameless alive through oral traditions, passing down stories from generation to generation. Here, Tear learned more about Malakar's source of power, a dark crystal hidden in the heart of his fortress. This crystal was the key to Malakar's control over names and identities, and it was the one thing that could end his reign. The time in the City of Whispers was not without its challenges. Tensions rose within the group as the enormity of their task became clear. Goran, who had once been a knight of great renown, began to doubt the point of their struggle. "What use is it to fight if no one will remember our names?" he asked one night as they sat around a small fire. His voice was heavy with weariness. Tear, too, felt the weight of their mission, but he knew he could not let doubt take root. "We fight not for ourselves," he replied, his voice firm. "We fight for those who come after us. We fight for a world where names matter less than deeds, where freedom is worth more than glory. Our names may be forgotten, but our actions will live on in the freedom of our people." His words rekindled the fire in their hearts, and they knew that there was no turning back. They would see this through to the end, no matter the cost. The journey to Malakar's fortress was long and arduous, but the Nameless Army moved with purpose. They avoided the main roads, traveling through hidden paths and secret tunnels known only to those who had lived in the shadows for so long. When they finally reached the fortress, it loomed before them like a dark monolith, its spires reaching up into the stormy sky. The air crackled with dark magic, and the ground seemed to tremble beneath their feet. The siege began under the cover of darkness. The Nameless Army was small, but they were determined. They moved like shadows, slipping past the outer defenses and striking with precision. The fortress was protected by an army of soulless, nameless soldiers, those who had failed in past rebellions and had been enslaved by Malakar's magic. These soldiers were formidable, but they lacked the spirit that drove Tear and his comrades. The battle was fierce, with both sides taking heavy losses. Tear fought with a ferocity born of desperation, cutting through the nameless soldiers with his sword. Lyra's arrows flew true, striking down enemies from a distance, while Goran used his knightly skills to hold the line. Sira tended to the wounded, her magic weaving through the battlefield like a silver thread, while Brack's mighty blows crushed anything that stood in their way. As they fought their way up the fortress, the air grew thick with the scent of blood and smoke. The walls seemed to close in around them, and the cries of the dying echoed through the halls. But Tear did not falter. He led the charge up the winding staircase that led to the throne room, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that this was their final stand, the moment that would decide the fate of Viridia. When they burst into the throne room, they found Malakar waiting for them. The sorcerer sat upon a throne of black stone, his eyes glowing with malevolent power. The dark crystal, the source of his strength, pulsed with a sinister light at the center of the room. "So, you have come at last," Malachar said, his voice cold and mocking. "The nameless heroes who believe they can defeat me. How quaint." Ter stepped forward, his sword gleaming in the dim light. "We have come to end your tyranny, Malachar," he declared. "Your reign of darkness ends here." Malachar laughed, a sound that sent chills down their spines. "End my reign?" he sneered. "You are but insects before me. Your names will be erased, your deeds forgotten. You will become nothing, just like all those who came before you." The sorcerer rose from his throne, his hands crackling with dark energy. "But I will offer you one chance," he continued, his eyes locking onto Ter. "Serve me, and I will let you keep your name. You will be remembered as a hero who saved your people, the one who ended the rebellion and restored order. Refuse, and you will be nothing more than a forgotten shadow." Ter felt the weight of the choice before him. He could accept Malachar's offer and secure a legacy for himself, or he could refuse and risk everything. The temptation was strong, but he knew that accepting the offer would mean betraying everything he stood for. He had not come this far to serve the very evil he had sworn to destroy. His grip tightened on his sword, and he took a step forward. "I choose freedom," he said, his voice unwavering. "Even if it means that I and my comrades are forgotten, we will break your hold on this land." Malachar's expression darkened, and he unleashed a torrent of dark magic. The room shook as the sorcerer's power surged, but Ter and his allies stood their ground. The battle that followed was fierce and brutal, with magic and steel clashing in a deadly dance. Ter fought with everything he had, knowing that this was their last chance. He could feel the power of the dark crystal pulling at him, trying to erase him from existence. But he pressed on, fueled by the memories of his parents, by the faces of those who had lost everything to Malachar's tyranny. Finally, with a roar of defiance, Ter leaped forward and drove his sword into the dark crystal. The impact sent a shockwave through the room, and the crystal shattered into 1,000 pieces. Malachar let out a scream of rage and despair as his power began to unravel. The dark magic that had bound the nameless soldiers dissipated, and they collapsed to the ground. Free at last, the fortress began to crumble around them as the sorcerer's power waned. Ter and his comrades stood victorious, but they knew that the cost had been great. As they watched, their forms began to fade, their names slipping away like sand through their fingers. But there was no regret in their hearts. They had fought for a future where names no longer held power over people's lives, where freedom was the true prize. As the fortress collapsed, the nameless army walked away, their figures fading into the mists of history. They knew that they would not be remembered, but they had won something far greater. They had won the freedom of their people, and that was all that mattered. In the years that followed, Viridia began to rebuild. The dark magic that had plagued the land was gone, and the people were free to live their lives without fear. The names of Ter and his comrades were lost to history, but their deeds lived on in the hearts of those they had saved. And in a small village at the edge of the cursed lands, a child found a sword buried in the ruins. It was old and worn, but it bore a symbol that no one could recognize. The child did not know the name of the hero who had wielded it, but they knew that it had been used to fight for a better world. The legend of the nameless hero spread, inspiring a new generation to stand up against tyranny, to fight for what was right, even if no one would remember their names, for in the end, it was not the names that mattered, but the deeds that they had done. As the dust of the fallen fortress settled, the land of Viridia began to breathe once more. The dark magic that had shrouded the world in fear for centuries was dissipating, like a storm that had finally blown itself out. Villages that had been hidden in the shadows now emerged into the light. People who had once cowered in fear of Malakar's wrath began to venture out, blinking at the unfamiliar brightness of freedom. Tyr and his companions, though fading from the memories of those they had saved, walked through the changing land, observing the early signs of hope. Their forms grew more transparent with each passing day, their names slipping further from the minds of the living. Yet, they were content, knowing that their sacrifice had brought about the dawn of a new era. In the quiet moments of their journey, Tyr often found himself reflecting on the choices they had made. The decision to shatter the dark crystal, knowing it would erase them from history, had been the hardest of his life. But as he looked at the faces of his comrades, Lyra, with her unyielding resolve, Goran, who had regained his honor in battle, Sira, whose healing hands had saved so many, and Brak, the silent giant whose strength had been their backbone, he knew they had done the right thing. The countryside, once bleak and barren, began to show signs of life. Where there had been charred earth, now small shoots of green pushed through the soil. Villagers who had lived in fear for so long began to rebuild, constructing homes where ruins had stood, planting crops in fields long neglected. The whispers of the past were slowly being replaced by the sounds of hammers on wood, the laughter of children, and the songs of a people rediscovering their joy. One evening, as they walked along a riverbank, Tyr and his companions noticed a group of villagers gathered around a fire. The villagers were telling stories, and Tyr paused to listen. They spoke of a great battle, of a nameless hero who had risen from the shadows to defeat an evil sorcerer. The details were vague, the names forgotten, but the essence of the tale remained. It was a story of courage, of sacrifice, of hope. Tyr smiled, knowing that even though they were no longer remembered by name, their legacy lived on. As the days turned into weeks, Tyr's form became more ethereal. He could feel his time in this world drawing to a close. The same was true for his comrades. They had known this moment would come, and they faced it with the same bravery they had shown in battle. Their work was done. The people of Viridia were free to forge their own future. One by one, the members of the nameless army began to disappear, their forms dissolving into the air like mist at sunrise. Sira was the first to go, her gentle smile the last thing they saw before she vanished. Then Goran, with a final nod of respect, faded away. Brak, always silent, gave a rare smile before he, too, was gone. Lyra, her eyes fierce and determined to the end, disappeared with her bow still slung across her back. Tyr was the last. He stood alone on a hill overlooking a valley where a new village was being built. The people below had no idea who he was, or what he had done for them, and that was exactly as it should be. He had fulfilled his purpose. He had fought for freedom, not for fame. As he felt himself begin to fade, he took one last look at the world he had helped to save, and then, he was gone, but the story did not end there. For while Tyr and his comrades had vanished, their spirit lived on. The villagers who had heard the story of the nameless hero passed it on to their children, who in turn passed it on to theirs. The tale spread across Viridia, growing and evolving with each telling. It became a legend, a symbol of the power of the human spirit to overcome even the darkest of times. Years passed, and the land continued to heal. The name of Malakar became nothing more than a bad memory, a warning to future generations of the dangers of unchecked power. But the nameless hero became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one could choose to stand and fight for what was right. In a small village at the edge of the cursed lands, the same child who had found Tyr's sword grew up to be a warrior in their own right. They carried the sword with them, though they never knew the name of the one who had wielded it. But they knew the story, and that was enough. The child, now a warrior, fought not for glory, but for the same ideals that had driven Tyr and his companions. And as they stood in battle, they felt the presence of the nameless hero with them, guiding their hand, steadying their heart. They knew that they, too, might one day be forgotten, but they fought on, knowing that their deeds would live on in the hearts of those they protected. The story of the nameless hero became the foundation of a new Viridia, a land where people were free to choose their own paths, where names mattered less than deeds, and where the legacy of freedom was passed from one generation to the next. And so, the nameless hero, though forgotten by name, was never truly gone. Their spirit lived on in the hearts of the people, in the stories that were told around campfires, in the actions of those who chose to fight for a better world. In the end, it was not the name that mattered, but the story, one that would be told for generations to come.